Planning a garden is like planning a trip away, almost as fun as the main event. I've been doing this for more than 30 years, and today I'm going to share my thought process for planning the perfect garden for the new season. But where to start? In my experience, it has to be the greediest crops of all, the sun lovers. I like to start with my warm season divas, those crops that like it nice and warm and balmy, with temperatures above about 70 Fahrenheit or around 20 Celsius, ideally. Think tomatoes, peppers, squash and so on. These guys need unbroken sunshine, or as close to it as you can get in my cloudy climate. They want the primest of prime real estate. My garden faces the warm afternoon sunshine, and these areas at the back here are generally the sunniest. So this is where I'm going to put my corn and my tomatoes. Of course, I need to think about the height of crops as well, positioning taller crops towards the back so they won't overshadow the shorter crops in front of them. And then there are these sprawlers like squash. These guys I place towards the edge of the plot so they can sprawl out in a way without swamping and surrounding other crops. Next up, I like to think about vertical interest, which can really bring a garden alive. Now, a garden of rows and blocks of vegetables has a habit of looking a bit, well, flat. But by adding something vertical like this and growing crops up it, well, suddenly you've upped your interest dramatically, and you can grow more in the space you have because you're growing up, not out. Vining crops like climbing beans, look the bee's knees against a teepee of bamboo or an arch or perhaps some trellis, especially with their pretty flowers. And talking of flowers and colour, I also like to include a vertical punch of sweet peas for their beautiful blooms and scent, of course. They make a really handy nab and grab posy for when we're off somewhere and I want to share a little bit of the garden. And of course, they're great for pollinating insects too. Then there's the likes of cucumbers, climbing peas and squash, all of which can be trained upwards, as well as naturally lofty staples like the corn I've placed over there. While you don't want taller crops to overshadow shorter sun-loving crops, if you are in a particularly hot and sunny spot, then you could use them to create intentional shade for cool season crops like, say, salads, leafy greens and the many brassicas, which will welcome a little bit of shade as respite from the hot sun. Now, these vining crops will grow up and will shadow them at exactly the time when they welcome the shade in the middle of summer onwards, so it's quite a smart move. Flowers are a must in the vegetable garden. They're food for the soul, and many like nasturtiums and borage flowers are edible too. Now, I make sure I include plenty of them here. I've got some lovely poached egg flowers that self-seed themselves, and these are the last of last year's alyssum. Flowers like this, as well as being beautiful, will also help to attract a legion of beneficial bugs like hoverflies and lacewings that will both improve pollination of my crops and serve to eat up any unwanted pests. I would say it's well worth sneaking in some flowers at the ends of rows, especially where they will add a welcome splash of colour from when you're walking into the garden. I'd also include them wherever there's a sliver of space. For example, French marigolds underneath cordon tomatoes or nasturtiums sprawling in and among asparagus. Sometimes it may feel like you're wasting space growing flowers where more vegetables could be growing, but these boosting blooms will contribute way more than they take. Now, here's a little table of my favourite vegetable garden flowers, though I'm sure you will have favourites to add to the list as well. With sun worshippers, climbers and flowers in your plan, it's time to slot in the rest. And next for me are my staples like potatoes, onions and garlic. Roots like carrots, beetroot and parsnips. Brassicas such as kale and cabbage, and the rest. Try grouping some of these crops together. For example, brassicas to make it easier to net them against butterflies, and salads so you can water them easily in one go. Some plants, like salads and herbs, are harvested quite regularly, so it's worth putting beds with these crops in closer to the house so you can just nip out and grab what you need on the spur of the moment, whether that's some oregano or thyme for your roasted veggies or a quick supper time salad. With everything in place on your garden plan, you can then think about how long each crop will occupy its space for. And that's why I love our garden planner. You can set the dates each crop will be in the ground for, and then view your plan in a particular month to see when and where gaps appear. That makes it so much easier for planning follow-on or succession crops. For example, leeks following on from early potatoes, or hardy brassicas like cabbage after, say, early carrots or spinach. It just means you can pack so much more into your plot and get 2 crops in one season. Don't forget to include what I call my peripherals. That's those things that will make tending your garden easier or enhance the way the garden functions. Now, the first thing to include is 1 or more compost bins or heaps. That will make it easy to turn old crops and weeds into new soil improver to lavish onto your garden. Include it close to where you're growing your food so that it makes clearing away plant matter quick and easy. Include a small shed to store those everyday tools and some means of collecting rainwater. Or how about a cold frame, purpose-made or improvised, as somewhere to acclimatise young plants in advance of planting them outside? Just include anything that makes your life easier and design them into your plan. And don't forget to include somewhere to sit and admire your beautiful garden. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. What if you are coming at this as a complete beginner or are extending your garden? Here are my tips to help you pick the perfect spot and style for your new garden beds. Most crops need plenty of direct sunshine, at least 6 hours and ideally 8 hours or more. So pick the sunniest spot you can find for your plot. Now, if you are unsure where the sun and shadows fall, observe your garden on a sunny day and track the course of those shadows, and of course pick the sunniest spot. Bear in mind that nearby trees and shrubs will come into leaf as spring progresses, so you'll need to consider the shade that they will cast. Now, since I started my garden several years ago, these have really grown up and out, so before spring arrives, I will need to be doing some pretty severe pruning to let the light back in. If you are in a very hot climate, you may actually want to seek out somewhere that gets at least some shade during the hottest part of the year to stop plants from drying out. You may also want to locate your garden close to a water source to save you lugging heavy watering cans back and forth, and to make it easier to set up drip irrigation. You'll also need to consider how you'd like to grow, whether in the ground, in raised beds, or even in containers. Each has their merits. Containers are really flexible and are the ideal choice for smaller gardens and obviously paved areas. In-ground beds are cheap and easy to set up. No need to dig. Just plonk some compost onto your soil and you're good to go. But let me show you something. This winter has been almost biblically wet, and it's a pattern that seems to be increasingly the norm. And if you look here, you can see that my clay soil is absolutely saturated. Now, I could grow in ground, but I would need to wait a long time in spring for this to all drain off. Which is why I've chosen to grow in raised beds. Raised beds drain quicker in spring, which means they warm up a lot quicker too, and they help to keep everything nice and orderly. Now, raised bed kits can be on the pricey side, but you can save money by making your own from planks of wood or by using pallet collars like I have with my beds. Of course, every situation is unique, so opt for a growing style that matches your location, budget and preference. The next step is to lay out the permanent structures that will always be there. In my case, that meant dropping onto my plan the raised beds, as well as structures like fences, walls, and even the trampoline over there. While finessing your plan, don't forget to think about your paths. Now, honestly, mine could do with being a little bit wider. I'd say you want to have them wide enough to comfortably walk down while wheeling along a wheelbarrow, and consider how the voluminous growth and sprawl of plants in peak season will affect that. And when it comes to deciding what you want to grow, start with what you and your family actually like to eat, because there's no point growing stuff they won't enjoy. In time, you'll also want to consider what varieties have performed well for you in the past. For example, there's a slow to bolt variety of spinach that I discovered last spring that meant I got many more pickings earlier in the season of lovely leaves, so I will definitely be growing that again. It's well worth researching varieties that will perform well in your environment and climate. And then the hard bit. Consider how much space you have, then edit down your list so you're not trying to cram too much into the space you have. Too many gardeners make this mistake of trying to grow more and more in a particular space, and it just doesn't work, which is one reason I really like using a garden planner, because it shows you exactly how many plants you can get into the space that you have available. As well as growing things we like to eat, I also like to prioritise varieties that are particularly productive or that cost a lot to buy in the shops. Yes, there will always be my gold stamped staples like beetroots or climbing beans, but each year I also try to grow something new, and this season I'm really excited to try okra. I just can't wait. I find planning my garden a doddle with the garden planner because I can continue to tweak my plan as and when, and then the accompanying plant list will tell me exactly how many of each I need to sow and when they'll be growing. It's all really rather handy. If you'd like to try out the garden planner for free, you can with our 7-day trial. There's no need to enter any payment details, and you can even print off and keep your plan forever. Give it a whirl. Just follow the QR code or the link here to give it a try. I'll catch you next time.